The wind howled across the broken colony, carrying sharp snowflakes that cut the skin like tiny knives. Ruined buildings stood like skeletons, their walls cracked and blackened from old fires. The alien mother walked slowly through the empty streets, her thin cloak pressed tightly around her small daughter. The child's feet were bare and purple, each step leaving weak marks on the frozen ground. The mother whispered softly, telling her child to hold on, but her own voice shook with fear. They had not eaten in days, only scraps of frozen roots and bitter leaves. The world was dying around them, and they were dying with it. She had lost her husband months ago to sickness. Then her tribe scattered when the raiders came. Now it was just her and the child walking through the endless snow. The stars above gave no warmth, only cold silver light. Ahead, a small glow appeared in the distance, a flicker of fire inside a trading outpost. The mother's heart pounded, hope rising inside her chest. Maybe someone would give food. Maybe her daughter would live one more night. But she had no coins, no trade, no value left in this world. Only her body, broken but still alive. The thought made her sick. But the sight of her daughter's shivering body was stronger. She whispered to herself, "Just one hot meal for her, and I will give myself away." Her words froze in the cold air, like a secret she hoped no one would hear, but someone did. A shadow moved near the edge of the firelight, a tall figure wrapped in heavy furs, a human, broad shoulders, scar across his cheek, eyes sharp and watchful. He had been leaning against the wall, listening unseen until now. The human stepped forward, his boots crunching in the snow. The mother froze, clutching her daughter tightly, fear rushing through her veins. She had heard stories of humans, some kind, most cruel. She did not know what kind of man this was. The child whimpered, pressing her face against her mother's chest. The human looked at them for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then he spoke in a low, steady voice. "You don't need to sell yourself for food." The mother blinked, not sure if she had heard correctly. Her lips trembled, words caught in her throat. The human reached into his pack and pulled out a small metal box. He opened it, and steam rose into the frozen air. Inside was a piece of bread, thick and warm, with a little stew in a container. The smell wrapped around them like a miracle. The child lifted her head, eyes wide, tears forming from hunger. The mother felt her knees weaken, torn between pride and desperation. "Take it," the human said, holding it out. His voice carried no demand, no bargain, just simple command. The mother shook her head, whispering, "I have nothing to give back." The human's eyes softened, and he said, "You don't need to give me anything." For a long moment, the mother stared at him, unsure. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, but her daughter's shivering body anchored her in place. Finally, she reached out with trembling hands and took the food. The child grabbed a piece of bread and bit into it, her little teeth tearing into the soft warmth. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in weeks, she looked peaceful. The mother's own tears froze on her cheeks. She whispered a quiet thank you, her voice breaking. The human stood silently, watching them. He did not smile, but there was something in his eyes, a shadow of old pain. The storm outside howled louder, snow swirling around them like a warning. The mother realized this stranger had changed everything in one moment. She had offered herself for food, but instead a human had given her hope. The night was still cruel, the cold still sharp, but for the first time, she believed they might survive until morning. The outpost was small, built from old metal walls and broken parts of ships. Its firelight flickered weakly against the frozen night. Inside, traders and scavengers sat around, drinking bitter ale, counting scraps, exchanging stolen goods. The alien mother held her daughter close, staying near the doorway, too afraid to step further. The human stood near her, tall and quiet, his fur cloak heavy with frost, his eyes sharp like someone who had seen too many battles. People inside glanced at him, then at the woman and child, and then turned away, as if nothing strange had happened. The child ate slowly, her small fingers clumsy with the bread, her eyes wide with relief. Every bite sent warmth back into her tiny body. Every swallow gave her one more breath against the cold. The mother could not stop staring at the human, her mind full of questions. Why had he given them food when others had turned them away? Why had he asked for nothing when she had already whispered her shame into the air? She wanted to ask, but fear kept her silent. The human finally spoke again, his voice calm but heavy. "You can't stay out there tonight. The storm will bury you alive." The mother tightened her grip on her daughter, whispering, "We have nowhere else." The human nodded once, as if he already knew. "I have shelter outside the colony. It's small but warm," he said. The mother's chest tightened, suspicion rising inside her heart. Every kindness had a price in this broken world, and she feared his price would come later. But her daughter coughed, weak and sharp, and her doubt wavered. He started walking toward the door, his heavy boots echoing on the metal floor. After a moment of hesitation, she followed, carrying her daughter in her arms. The storm hit them instantly, snow cutting across their faces, winds screaming through the dead streets. The human moved steadily, strong steps pushing against the storm. The mother struggled to keep up, but his shadow in the snow pulled her forward. It felt like following someone into danger, but also like following a thin thread of hope. After what felt like hours, he stopped at a hidden doorway built into the side of a collapsed building. He unlocked the steel door with a rusted code panel, the machine beeping weakly. Warm air slipped out, carrying the faint smell of smoke and cooked food. The mother almost collapsed when she stepped inside. The place was small, with a single heater in the corner, a rough bed, and shelves stacked with cans and water containers. It was not much, but compared to the frozen streets outside, it was paradise. He set down his pack and took off his heavy cloak, revealing the scarred armor underneath. Marks of old battles, burn lines, claw scratches, dents that told silent stories. The mother laid her daughter on the bed, tucking her in with the cloak he handed her. The child fell asleep quickly, her face calm for the first time in months. The mother sat near the heater, rubbing her hands together, still watching the human carefully. He worked in silence, heating a pot of stew, his movements sharp but tired. Finally, he sat across from her and spoke. "My name is Kale," he said simply. The mother hesitated, then whispered, "I am Lyra, and this is my daughter Sarah." Kale nodded. As if memorizing the names, he stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking again. "I know what hunger does. I've seen it too many times. I've lived it," he said, his voice low. Lyra's eyes narrowed, curiosity fighting her fear. "You gave us food, but why?" "Humans don't give without taking," she whispered. Kale's jaw tightened, his gaze hard. "I am not like the ones you met," he answered. The silence grew heavy between them, filled only by the sound of the storm outside. Lyra wrapped the cloak tighter around her body. Staring at the sleeping child, she wanted to believe him. But trust was something she no longer carried. Still, she could not deny the truth. He had saved them for no reason she could see, and that was both comforting and terrifying. Kale leaned back against the wall, his eyes half closed. "You should rest. The storm will not break until morning," he said. Lyra stayed awake, her mind racing, her body tense. She had walked into the shelter of a stranger. A human no less, but her daughter was safe, breathing softly, warm at last. And for tonight, that was enough outside. The wind screamed louder, shaking the metal walls. Tracks in the snow, far beyond the outpost, were already being covered by the storm. But those tracks belonged to more than hunters. They belonged to men who would soon come looking, and Kale knew that trouble was never far behind when the weak found refuge. He looked once at Lyra and Sarah, then at the door, and his hand moved quietly to rest on the weapon at his side. The night was not over, and danger was already closer than they knew. The storm raged for hours, snow beating against the metal walls like fists of ice. Inside the shelter, the fire crackled weakly, casting long shadows across the small room. Sarah, the little girl, slept under the heavy cloak, her tiny hands gripping the fabric even in dreams. Her breath was slow, calm, no longer broken with painful coughs. For Lyra, that sound alone was enough to bring tears to her eyes. She sat close to the heater, watching the human, Kale. As he worked silently, he cleaned his weapon, checked his supplies, and moved with the calm skill of someone used to danger. Every scar on his armor, every line on his face, told her he had seen too much, but he did not speak of it. He only sat with steady patience, as if storms were nothing new to him. Lyra felt unease twist inside her chest, because kindness was never free, not in this world. When Kale noticed her watching, he spoke at last. "You don't trust me," he said quietly. Lyra's lips tightened. She looked down at her daughter, then whispered, "Trust is a luxury. I can't afford it." Kyle nodded slowly. No anger in his face, only the weight of old memories. "I know," he answered. "I lost my family to people who thought the same." The words caught her by surprise, and for a moment she almost asked more, but fear sealed her lips again. Kyle leaned against the wall, his eyes on the fire. "You're not the first to think I would take what I want," he said, his voice low, "but I am still here giving, not taking." Lyra closed her eyes, torn between pride and gratitude. In her heart she wanted to believe, but her scars whispered otherwise. The storm grew louder, the metal walls groaning under its weight. Cale stood and checked the door, his hand resting briefly on the lock. "Storms cover tracks," he muttered. "But not forever." Lyra frowned, whispering, "Who would track us?" "We have nothing." Cale turned, his eyes sharp and cold. "You have everything to someone desperate enough. Raiders hunt the weak, and slavers hunt the lost." Fear tightened in her chest, and she pulled Sarah closer even in her sleep. Kyle saw the motion and sighed, rubbing the scar on his cheek. "You don't need to fear me, but you should fear them," he said firmly. He sat again, his hand close to his weapon, his body coiled like a soldier waiting for the next fight. The silence between them stretched, filled with the storm's endless roar. Hours passed and exhaustion pulled at Lyra's eyes. She leaned against the wall, watching the fire fade into embers. Her body wanted to rest, but her mind screamed to stay awake. Yet slowly, warmth and safety dulled her fear, and she drifted into sleep. Cale watched her for a long time before closing his own eyes, though his hand never left the weapon at his side. Morning came gray and bitter, the storm finally weakening. The world outside was buried deep under snow, silence pressing on everything. Cale opened the door just a little, the cold air biting at his skin. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing at faint shadows moving in the distance. Someone was out there, too far to see clearly, but close enough to know danger would come soon. When he closed the door, Lyra was awake, her arms wrapped around her daughter. She looked at him, searching his face, and asked softly, "Why do you care?" "You don't even know us." Cale paused, his jaw tight, and then he spoke. "Because once I begged for help and no one came. I will not let it happen again." His voice carried the weight of a wound too deep to heal. For the first time, Lyra believed him. If only a little. Sarah stirred, opening her eyes, her face still pale but warmer than before. She looked at Kyle and whispered with a small voice, "Thank you." The word struck him harder than any bullet, and he only nodded, turning away. He busied himself with preparing food, though his hands moved slower, as if her words had broken something inside him. Lyra watched him, her suspicion softening. Though not gone, the day stretched on, snow slowly easing. But Cale's gaze often returned to the window. He saw those distant shapes again, closer this time. He did not tell Lyra, but the truth sat heavy in his chest. The storm had saved them for one night, but men were coming, and when they arrived, he would have to make a choice again. The storm had passed, but silence was worse than the howling winds. Snow lay heavy across the ruined colony, smooth and white, as if the world had been buried under a cold shroud. Cale stood at the doorway of the shelter, watching the pale horizon, his breath rising in clouds. His eyes were sharp, searching the snow for movement. Because he knew storms did not erase threats, they only delayed them. Inside, Lyra helped Sarah sit up, wrapping the cloak tighter around the girl's small shoulders. Her daughter's color had returned, a faint glow in her cheeks, but her legs were weak. Her feet still raw from frost. Lyra brushed Sarah's hair back, whispering a lullaby from her people, a soft sound that carried sorrow and hope together. Cale heard it, but he said nothing. He only listened with a face that revealed nothing. When Lyra looked up, she saw him scanning the horizon again, his hand near his weapon. "Are we not safe here?" she asked. Her voice low. Cale shook his head slowly. "Safe does not last, not in places like this." The weight of his words pressed on her chest, reminding her of nights running, hiding, never stopping. Later, as Cale prepared a meal from his supplies, Lyra dared to ask, "You said once no one helped you? What did you mean?" Cale's hand paused over the fire, his jaw tightening. He did not answer at first, as if the memory itself was poison. Finally his voice came, slow and heavy. "I was a soldier once, part of a great war. I followed orders, fought battles, watched comrades die, all for nothing." His eyes stayed on the fire, glowing orange against the scars of his face. "When the war ended, they left us, abandoned us in broken fields with no food, no shelter, no care." His voice grew colder. "I begged for help, but no one came. Only scavengers who took what little I had." Lyra listened, her chest tightening with something she did not expect. Understanding, she whispered, "So you saved us because you could not save yourself." Kyle finally looked at her, his eyes dark but softer than before. "Maybe, Or maybe because I am tired of watching the weak suffer while the strong walk away. Silence filled the room again, broken only by the sound of the fire and Sarah's gentle breathing. Lyra looked at her daughter, then at Cale, and for the first time she did not feel only fear, but something else, something dangerous. Trust. That night, Cale heard something outside, faint but sharp, a crunch of snow under heavy boots. He moved to the door quietly, signaling Lyra to stay silent through the narrow crack. He saw movement, shadows slipping across the white, figures cloaked in black carrying weapons. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Raiders, he muttered, barely loud enough for himself. He closed the door softly, checking the lock, then turned to Lyra. "They've found your trail," he said. "We don't have long." Lyra's face went pale, fear flashing in her eyes. They want us, don't they?" she whispered. Cale nodded, his voice grim. "You and the child are worth a price, and they will not stop until they take you." Lyra pulled Sarah close, her hands trembling. Her mind screamed to run, but she knew the storm had left deep snow, and with Sarah so weak, escape was impossible. She looked at Cale, her eyes full of fear and doubt. "Will you give us to them?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Humans always take the easy path." Cale's face hardened, his scar pulling tight. "I am not them," he growled, his voice like iron. "You think I saved you just to hand you over? No, I've seen what raiders do. I won't let them touch her, or you." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Cale checking his weapon. Loading it with steady hands, Lyra watched, stunned, as if she could not believe anyone would fight for her, a stranger and her daughter. But in his movements, in his eyes, she saw truth. Not words, but action. And for the first time since her world had shattered, she felt a spark of something unfamiliar. Hope. Outside, the raiders moved closer, their voices faint through the storm's echo. Cale positioned himself by the door, his body tense like a drawn bow. He looked back at Lyra once, his eyes fierce but calm. "Stay behind me. Protect the child, no matter what happens," he said. Lyra nodded, holding Sarah close, her heart racing like a drum. The door rattled with the first strike from outside. The sound of steel on steel. The past had returned, not only for Cale but for Lyra as well. And in the shadows of the storm, their fates were about to be tested. The first strike against the door echoed like thunder through the small shelter. Metal groaned and dust shook from the ceiling. Sarah whimpered in her mother's arms, clutching tightly to her cloak. Lyra's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to shield her daughter. Cale stood in front of the door, his weapon raised, his body tense like stone ready to break. Outside, rough voices shouted, muffled by the steel barrier. "Open up," one snarled. "We know you're in there. Hand over the woman and the brat and maybe we let you live." The words cut into Lyra like knives, her knees weakening. Her worst fears had come true. The raiders had found them, and now her daughter's life hung in the balance. Cale did not answer, his face hard, his eyes fixed on the door. He motioned silently for Lyra to stay back, then whispered, "They will try to break in, but I will hold them." Lyra shook her head, fear spilling from her eyes. "There are too many. You can't fight them alone." Kyle's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've fought worse," he said, his voice cold. The door rattled again. Another strike, louder this time. Cale moved fast, sliding a metal bar into place across the frame, reinforcing it. Then he crouched low, checking his spare ammunition. His hands steady, practiced. Lyra watched him. Torn between terror and disbelief, this human, a stranger, was preparing to risk his life for them. The raiders struck again, the steel bending under their force. Sparks flew as blades scraped against the door. Cale's finger tightened on the trigger, his breathing calm, measured, then the lock burst. The door swinging open with a violent crash, snow swirling in as shadows stormed the room. The first raider stepped in, tall and broad, with a scar across his forehead. Before he could raise his weapon, Cale fired, the blast filling the small space with thunder. The raider collapsed into the snow, lifeless. Chaos erupted, shouts and gunfire filling the air. Lyra screamed and dropped to the ground. Covering Sarah with her body, Cale moved like a machine, every motion precise, every shot clean. He fought with the cold fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. Each raider that entered fell, but more pushed forward, their rage fueled by blood. One raider slipped past, his eyes wild, rushing toward Lyra. She froze, fear locking her body until Cale shouted, "Move." The word broke her paralysis, and she grabbed a metal rod from the corner, swinging it wildly. The blow cracked against the raider's arm. Enough to throw him off balance. Cale's next shot finished him, the body falling inches from where Sarah hid. The room shook with the violence of the fight, smoke and snow mixing in the air. Cale took a hit to his shoulder, blood staining his cloak, but he did not stop. He pushed forward, forcing the raiders back out into the storm. Lyra crawled to the corner, pulling her daughter close, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Outside, Cale faced the remaining men in the snow, the wind cutting across their weapons. His breath came heavy, but his stance never faltered. The raiders circled, growling threats, but Cale's eyes were colder than the ice beneath their feet. "You picked the wrong night," he muttered, then charged. The clash was brutal. Steel against steel, blood against snow. Cale fought with the rage of memory, every strike fueled by ghosts of his past. One raider screamed as Cale's blade tore across him. Another fell with a broken neck. Still Cale bled, his body weakening. But his will unbroken, from the doorway Lyra watched. Torn between horror and awe, she saw him stand against men twice his number, refusing to surrender. Her fear shifted into something deeper. Respect, maybe even trust. This man was no slaver, no raider. No heartless soldier. He was different at last. The last raider stumbled into the snow, clutching his wounds, then fled into the storm. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Cale's heavy breathing. He staggered, blood dripping down his arm, but he remained standing. The snow around him was stained red. Bodies lying still in the white. Lyra rushed to him, still holding Sarah against her chest. "You're hurt," she cried, reaching for his wounded arm. Cale shook his head, his face pale but calm. "Better me than her," he said simply. Those words cut into her heart, deeper than any blade. For the first time, Lyra believed him completely. This human had chosen to fight, not for gain, not for pride, but for them, and that price of mercy, written in his blood, bound their fates together in the frozen night. The storm had grown quiet, but the silence was heavy with death. Snow stretched wide outside the shelter, stained in patches of red where the raiders had fallen. Their bodies lay scattered, frozen eyes staring into nothing. Weapons half buried under ice. Cale stood among them, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths, blood seeping through the torn fabric of his shoulder. He leaned against the door frame, his weapon still in his hand, though his strength was fading. Every muscle ached, every scar burned as if alive. But he stayed on his feet, refusing to fall while Lyra and Sarah watched him. Lyra rushed out into the snow, holding Sarah close with one arm, the other reaching for Cale. "You're bleeding too much," she whispered. Fear thick in her voice. Cale gave her a faint look, his lips curling in something between a grim smile and pain. "I've bled worse," he muttered, then staggered, almost falling. Lyra caught him with her small frame, her knees sinking into the snow as she tried to support him. His weight was heavy, but she refused to let him collapse. Sarah pressed her little hands to his cloak, whispering, "Don't die. Please don't die." Cale looked down at her, his jaw tightening, and for a moment the hardened soldier was gone, replaced by something fragile. "I won't," he said softly, then closed his eyes as she and her mother pulled him back inside. The shelter smelled of smoke and iron, the fire struggling to stay alive. Lyra lowered Cale onto the bed, her hands shaking as she tore strips from her cloak to press against his wound. Blood soaked through quickly, hot against her skin. She clenched her teeth, working fast, whispering words from her people, half prayer, half comfort. Cale groaned but did not push her away, his body stiff with stubbornness even as blood drained from him. "You shouldn't have fought them all," she whispered. Her voice breaking, Cale opened one eye, his stare sharp even in weakness. "If I didn't, you'd be gone, both of you," he said. Lyra's breath caught, her throat tight. She looked at him and saw the truth in his words. The truth that his wounds were the cost of their survival. She bound the cut as best she could, the bleeding slowing but not stopping. Cale's face was pale, his skin damp with cold sweat. Yet his hand never let go of the weapon at his side. His instincts refusing rest, Lyra gently pushed it aside, whispering, "You're safe here, at least for tonight." Cale almost argued, but the exhaustion dragged him down, and his eyes closed. Hours passed as he slept, his breathing shallow but steady. Lyra sat beside him, Sarah curled in her lap, her tiny body finally resting without fear. The fire's glow painted the room in soft gold. But outside, the night stayed sharp and merciless. Lyra's thoughts swirled, pulling her between fear, gratitude, and something she had not felt in a long time. Trust. She had offered herself for food, ready to give away her last dignity to save her daughter. But this human had fought instead, and shed his blood for them. She did not understand why, but she could no longer deny it. When Cale stirred, his eyes opening slowly, Lyra leaned forward. "You should not move," she whispered quickly. He gave a faint laugh that turned into a cough. "I've been told that before," he muttered. She shook her head, frustration mixing with relief. "Why do you keep risking yourself for us? You don't even know us," she said. Cale stared at the ceiling, silent for a long moment, then answered quietly, "Because I know what it feels like to be left with nothing. I won't let it happen to you." The words struck deep into her chest, breaking down walls she had built for survival. She wanted to argue, but instead she found herself whispering, "Thank you." Her voice trembled, and she hated how weak it sounded. Cale turned his head toward her, his eyes steady, and said, "Don't thank me yet. This fight isn't over." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying faint echoes across the frozen wasteland. The bodies of the raiders would not stay hidden forever, and others would come looking. Cale knew it, and Lyra sensed it in the tension that never left his body. But in that small shelter, in that fragile moment, they were alive. Sarah slept between them, her small hands curled against her mother's cloak, her breath soft, and for the first time in many nights, Lyra felt the sharp edge of fear dull just a little, replaced by something else, hope. She looked at Cale, his face lined with pain but strong even in weakness, and she realized that this man, this human, had given more than food, more than shelter. He had given her daughter a chance to live, and he had given her a reason to believe again, even if blood had to stain the snow for it. The morning sun broke weakly through the frozen clouds, spilling pale light across the wasteland. Snow glittered like broken glass, hiding the scars of the battle that had stained it red. Inside the shelter, Cale woke slowly, his body stiff, his shoulder bound in rough cloth stained dark with blood. He sat up with effort, his jaw tight, but his eyes steady. Lyra was already awake, tending to the fire with careful hands. Sarah slept beside her, wrapped in Cale's heavy cloak, her cheeks warmer, her breathing strong. When Lyra saw Kyle move, she rushed to him, pressing her hand gently against his chest to stop him. "You shouldn't rise yet, you need rest," she whispered firmly. Cal gave her a faint look, half amusement, half stubbornness. "Rest won't stop what's coming," he said quietly. She frowned, fear flickering in her eyes. "You think more will come?" she asked. Cale nodded. "Raiders don't travel alone. The ones I killed will be missed." The words weighed heavily in the small room, but Lyra refused to let despair take root. "We can't keep running forever," she whispered, her hand trembling as it brushed her daughter's hair. Cale's gaze softened, and he answered, "Then we stop running and start surviving." For a while, silence filled the shelter, broken only by the fire's gentle crackle. Lyra studied him, the human who had appeared like a shadow from the storm. He had fought for them, bled for them, and still he spoke as if they were worth saving. Her chest tightened with emotions she could not name: fear, gratitude, and something that felt dangerously close to trust. Later, Cale stepped outside, leaning against the doorframe as he scanned the horizon. The world was still harsh, endless snow stretching out in every direction. But the storm had cleared. Tracks from the raiders led away into the distance. Already fading under the wind, he tightened his grip on his weapon. Knowing they had only bought time, not safety, Lyra joined him, wrapping her cloak tighter around herself. For a moment they stood in silence, two survivors staring into the cold unknown. Finally, she whispered, "When I first saw you, I thought you would take from us like the others." Cale's eyes flicked to her, sharp but not unkind. "And now?" he asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her voice soft. "Now I see you gave instead." He looked back at the horizon, his jaw tightening. "I didn't give because I am good," he said slowly. "I gave because I remember the night I begged for food and was left to die." Lyra felt his words sink deep, raw and unpolished. She reached down, taking her daughter's small hand in hers, then looked at him with steady eyes. "Whatever your reason, you saved her. And you saved me," she said firmly. Sarah stirred then, rubbing her eyes as she woke, her little voice soft. "Is it morning?" she asked, her words carrying innocence untouched by the battle. Cale crouched down despite the pain in his shoulder, looking at her directly. "Yes, little one. It's morning," he said, his voice rough but gentle. She smiled faintly, her tiny hand reaching to touch the scar on his cheek. Then we're safe because you're here, she whispered. The words struck Cale harder than any blade. Leaving him silent, Lyra watched, her throat tight, her heart pulling in directions she had long tried to ignore. This man was not her tribe, not her people. Yet in a single night he had become the wall between life and death for her child. The bond forming between them was fragile, but it was real, and in this world of ruins and storms, it was more valuable than gold. Cale rose again, looking at both mother and child. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice steady. "This place is marked with blood, and blood always draws more." Lyra nodded, her fear tempered with resolve. "Then where do we go?" she asked. Cale's eyes scanned the endless white, then returned to her. "Anywhere the raiders aren't, and where the three of us can make a stand." For a long moment, they simply stood together, three figures against a broken world. The human who had once been abandoned, the alien mother who had lost everything, and the child who carried the last spark of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with storms and enemies yet to come. But as Cale took the first step into the snow, Lyra followed, her daughter's hand in hers. The past was filled with loss, the present with danger, but the future now held something new. Not safety, not comfort, but the chance to survive together. And in that frozen wasteland, where mercy was rare and hope rarer still, they had found both in each other. A new beginning had been born from the blood on the snow,